Hey guys, 16-Bit Dad here, and welcome back to Retro Writing episode 2 now, where we're going to be looking at Koudelka for the PS1. It's probably my all-time favourite game ever made. In fact, it's not even probably, it is my all-time favourite game ever made. So, what better thing to do than to sit and analyse and kind of dissect the storyline a bit. So yeah, for those who are kind of just starting with this series, and indeed considering this is episode 2, pretty much for everyone, just a little quick idea of what we'll be doing in these shows. We'll be sitting here and I'll be just talking to all of you out there in the world who are watching this about various different aspects of storylines for video games, such as their themes and the various things that happen in the game around those themes, and how the plot all sort of fits together. I'm not going to be summarising the plot. Instead, I'm going to be analysing the plot. So there will be spoilers still. In fact, for this episode, there will be spoilers for both Koudelka and Shadow Hearts, which was the follow-on series. I think it'll only be spoilers for the first in the Shadow Hearts games, but just putting the warning out there. So yeah, let's get on with it, shall we? Okay, so Koudelka, the overall plot is it covers 5, maybe 6 themes, really. Yeah, 6 themes, I would say. You've got blind faith and just putting all of your belief blindly into this one ideal, whether it's religion, whether it's a person and their ideals, anything. Just the fact that you're so blindly following it and is a real negative, and this game kind of covers that and why it's a negative. On top of that, it also looks at love, but not in the sense of there is a love story. It looks at how much of a drive love can be for people in life to not only do good but also to do really bad things, and also how, if you're not shown love, how it can affect you and how it can change the way you view the world. The next one would be life and death. Pretty obvious ones there. Don't really need to explain what life and death is, but effectively the game just covers how these kind of things, how death can affect you and how a drive through life can really lead to some struggles. It also looks at immortality, but again, not in a way where it makes it positive. It looks at it from, to be honest, quite a realistic point of view, where immortality, a lot of people would love it, or at least they think they want it, but if they were to actually get it, it might not be exactly what they want. And then the other thing that it looks at, actually there's 2 more things. It's very much a story of overcoming the past. The characters do have some pretty nasty, pretty tragic backstories, and while not all of them do manage to overcome it, some of them do, which we will get into. And the final thing it looks at is class and social status, because it is set in the 1800s, the late 1800s, but still, and class and social status was still a very, very big thing, especially in the United Kingdom, because the game is set in Wales, which is awesome. Yeah, that's kind of the overall themes of the plot of Koudelka. So, if we start with looking at blind faith and how the game kind of covers that, it's pretty much entirely represented by the character of James. Now, James is a bishop who has been sent to the monastery where the game takes place. You don't find it out to begin with, but he's been sent there to basically find and recover this manuscript that has been stolen from the Vatican. So straight away, he doesn't really know why it's stolen. He doesn't know anything about it. He doesn't know what the book really does. All he knows is it apparently holds the secret to life and death, and that it was stolen from the church. So he's on a mission, and he will go and he will find this book. He doesn't he doesn't really even question why it was stolen. He just knows it was. The other aspects of it. Oh, another, because there's a few. Another aspect of James that kind of shows his blind faith and devotion is the way he views the caretakers in the monastery. Because at one point in the game, quite early in the game, the other two characters, Koudelka and Edward, they come across these two caretakers while they're trying to find their way around the house part of the monastery. They have dinner with them, and it turns out that the dinner was poisoned. Koudelka manages to heal Edward because she's psychic and magical powers, but basically the caretakers tried to murder them. This carries on with the caretakers being quite a threat in the monastery, but James refuses to believe it, because when he met with the caretakers, they were very kind to him. They were welcoming, completely different to the way they were with Koudelka and Edward. They're also devout Christians. At least it's insinuated that they're devout Christians, which is another kind of well, actually I think they're Catholics, one or the other. I'm not very good at religion, I apologise for that, but basically they have the same belief system as James, so that kind of is a bonding point for them. So because of that, he just flat out refuses throughout almost the entire game to think that the caretakers could even slightly be dangerous, let alone murderers. He just, no matter what evidence comes up, he just completely refuses it and just will not accept it. Another point to his blind faith is the fact that at one point when they're going through, I believe, the prison section, Koudelka uses her psychic abilities to try and find out what's going on and try and help them work out what to do and where to go next in order to actually survive. But because her abilities and the fact that she's communicating with the dead goes against his belief system, even though it's going to help him survive and live, he is incredibly disgusted, I guess, with what's going on and what he sees her do, and it really it creates tension between the two of them, because even though she's effectively trying to help the three characters survive and live and work out what's going on, he is so angry about it just because it goes against his beliefs. And then I'd say the other major part of it would be the way James looks at the monastery itself. So obviously, because it is a monastery, it is a holy building. However, as you progress through the game, obviously it's filled with monsters to begin with. You also find that it was a prison at one point, and that many people were tortured, murdered, raped. I mean, there were horrible things done to people in the building. James refuses to believe that any of the people who were in there could be anything other than heathens, heretics, thieves, or murderers, because they couldn't possibly be in a holy place and have that done to them. It can't happen because it's a holy place. He's so blinded by his faith that even as the evidence stacks up of the horrible things that have been going on in that building, he just cannot and will not accept it. He just says it's a holy building, so that they must have deserved it. That drives a huge wedge between the characters throughout most of the game. He really does he doesn't even look at what's going on around him. He's just like, this is my belief, this is the way things are, and I will not accept anything else. And it's that blind faith, not just in his religion, but in his own ideals and his own views of the world, that they really come back to bite him towards the end of the game. We'll get into that in a bit, because I'll talk about the different endings at the end of this video, but everything that he thinks, everything that he does, and everything that he believes so blindly lead up to what happens to him in the canonical ending. So then if we move on to the second theme, the theme of love. So as I said, there isn't really a love story in the game. There is a love story, but it's kind of already happened and it didn't end well. So it's kind of the basic driving force of the game, but it's already happened. But we'll come to that bit as the last section of this. We'll start actually with the little girl called Charlotte that you meet in the game. Now she's already dead. She is a ghost, and she's a very angry and vengeful ghost who really doesn't like people and likes to torment them, because she felt tormented her entire short life because she died, or she lived and died feeling like she wasn't loved. This isn't the case. Her mother was actually locked away in prison and did try to write letters to her, but the fact is, as far as she knew, she wasn't loved, and that drives her to this absolute hatred of everyone and everything, to the point where, as a ghost, she tries to get you killed because she thinks it's fun. She seems really antagonistic. If she is antagonistic, she's so full of and blinded by hate. But then, interestingly, during the game, if you do find the letters from her mother to her and you return them to Charlotte, even though she's a ghost, those letters will actually put her to peace and she will pass on, because all she never needed was to know that she was actually loved, and that lack of love drove her to be so angry at everything that she became a malevolent spirit. Another thing showing how love can really mess things up if you let it mess it up, really, is Patrick, the person who owns the monastery. He had a wife called Elaine. They loved each other very, very much. They seemed to be very happy together. But unfortunately, while he and one of the caretakers, Ogden, were out, I believe, just doing some work somewhere, some thieves broke into the monastery and killed Elaine. That loss of the love of his life drove him pretty mad, to the point where he paid someone to steal the document I mentioned earlier from the Vatican and bring it back to his monastery. That document being the, I think, Emigre manuscript. I think that's how you pronounce it. Effectively, it documents how you can bring someone back from the dead. You can see where I'm going with this, I'm sure. So he started this loss of the love of his life. Sorry about the chair. It drove him so crazy that he actually started working towards bringing her back from the dead. That includes lots of sacrifices. So basically, between himself and Ogden, who really wanted to bring her back as well, they started basically murdering hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in the monastery and really tainting it and filling it full of all these ghosts, because they're ghosts of people that have been killed there purely so that Patrick can bring his wife back to life. We'll cover what happens with that when we get to the life and death section of this little analysis, but from the love side of things, his absolutely devoted love for his wife drove him crazy after she died. Similarly, during the game, at one point, Ogden is trying to kill Koudelka, and his wife Bessie shoots him because basically enough is enough of all the killing and everything. But after shooting and killing him, because she loves him so much, she ends up turning the shotgun onto herself, blowing her own brains out because she doesn't want to live without him and she wants to pass on with him. So again, two different sides of the same coin. Elaine died, Patrick wants to bring her back to life. Ogden dies by Bessie's own hand, Bessie wants to join him in the afterlife. In but two sides of the same coin, because neither party wants to be without the person that they love. It's just one of them wants to bring that person back, the other one wants to go join them. And then it's difficult to talk about the next one without going into the endings too much, but what I'll say is the way James acts at the end of the game, in the canonical ending, what he actually does is entirely to bring peace to Elaine, because when he and Patrick were younger, they were friends and they were both in love with Elaine, and James, even though he joined the church, never stopped loving Elaine. So the fact that he does what he does in the ending, which we will get to, is another aspect of people and what love can drive them to do, and how it can be a real driving force for you, but both for good and for bad. And then the final aspect of love within the game is actually Koudelka herself, but in a sort of roundabout way, because she ended up living by herself as a child, and she started using her psychic powers to help people out, to speak with people that they've lost, to find items that they've long since misplaced, anything that she could help with. But she didn't do it because out of just wanting to make people happy. She did it because it made her feel wanted and needed, which she'd never felt throughout her entire life. So again, that lack of love driving you to kind of to try and change the way that your life is playing out, really. The next side of things would be the look at life and death, and also immortality. I'm going to cover them both together because they are quite similar. We'll start with looking at Ogden, the caretaker. Now, his backstory is that he was once the captain of a pleasure boat called the Princess Alice that unfortunately went up in flames. Pretty much everyone on the boat died, and he survived and got the blame for it. He would constantly profess his innocence, but the only person who in the end seemed to believe him was, funnily enough, Elaine, who hired him as the caretaker of their mansion to give him a new lease on life. Unfortunately, obviously, Elaine was then killed when he and Patrick were out doing some work. That led to a massive amount of guilt within him, to the point where he was just happily murdering anyone who trespasses in the monastery that he views as someone who doesn't belong there. Which also kind of comes back to how James, to why James didn't get poisoned by the caretakers, because obviously James comes in with his bishop's robes on, whereas Koudelka and Edward come in with kind of dirty, scroungy clothing that is just damaged and in tatters. So there's a big difference in the way that Ogden views them. He views Koudelka and Edward as potential thieves who are coming in to just steal some treasure that actually is in the monastery, whereas he views James as a priest of Ogden's own faith, so he doesn't want to harm the man. But yeah, basically, the guilt over the death of Elaine, even for Ogden, ends up driving him mad and turning him into a murderer. Patrick, for example, and related to that, the guilt over Elaine's death drives him crazy and turns him to black magic in an attempt to resurrect Elaine. His then utter failure at doing that creates massive guilt within him, to the point where he's willing to give up his own life to kind of fix what he's done. It's, without going into too much detail, effectively when he tries the actual resurrection, he brings back Elaine's body but not her soul. At that point, the body reanimates, a tree of life grows underneath it and surrounds it, and Elaine's body becomes demonic, and monsters and demons start infesting the entire mansion and the monastery and the grounds around it. So it's an utter failed experiment that turns his beloved wife, his beloved past wife, into a living monster, all because he wanted to bring her back to life. So he attempts to try and end it, and in an attempt to try and save face, I guess, and to bring peace back to his wife instead of having her body live as a monster, he ends up dying as well. So then if we look at the immortality side of things, that's really, obviously, it comes from the emigre manuscripts, but also there's one particular character who kind of defines the way immortality plays out in the Koudelka and Shadow Hearts world, and that's Roger Bacon. He was the man who originally translated the emigre manuscript for the Vatican hundreds of years ago. They then tried to kill him to hide the secrets, but he escaped and used it to give himself eternal life, to make himself immortal. However, it made him immortal with the expense of keeping his body the way it was. So he's now living forever in the body of a mummy, effectively. He is a crippled, damaged mummy, literally as a mummy. His skin is kind of shrunk back into his face. He looks like he's rotting, and he will look that way forever. Unable to really do much of anything because he moves so slowly. Actually, he moves slowly most of the time, but he can jump and spring around quite a bit. And also the fact that people will constantly shun him because of the way he is now. The fact that he does look basically like a monster, even if he is a really nice and helpful man. So he is forever, now that he's achieved immortality, he's forever destined to be shunned by society. And that's quite interesting because if you were to become immortal, you would never ever age again. You would stay exactly the point you were, or you would age indefinitely. And either way, people are going to start looking at you very strangely, treating you very differently, because if you stay young forever, they'll be jealous of you, they'll be angry with you because they will grow old and they will die. And then also, on the other hand, if you were to age indefinitely, you would become so decrepit looking after hundreds of years of living that no amount of plastic surgery could possibly make people want to be even near you. So you're destined to be alone for eternity. You'll live forever, but you'll just be alone. Which kind of comes back full circle to the love aspect of how this lack of love can cause people to do horrible things as well. By having that immortality that everyone seems to be wanting, you're probably going to end up turning yourself into a monster, because everyone you love is going to go away. They'll either just leave you out of fear, jealousy or anything else, or they naturally will die, and you'll be left there by yourself, unloved, and you'll probably go crazy. Everything sort of just fits together, and I love how they've done that. There's all these different aspects of the game that they seem so unrelated, like the fact, like the absolutely blind faith and the love and the search for immortality. They all seem unrelated, but they're not. They all play together so well. So then we go on to the next bit, which it's going to be quite short to talk about, which is basically overcoming your past, and that is entirely, in my opinion, it's emphasised by Koudelka more than anything. It's embodied by Koudelka. As a child, she was basically kicked out of her family and her village. She is a gypsy who had psychic powers, and her other gypsy family members were terrified of her, to the point where she, I believe, predicted her father's death down to the minute. And at that point, the family and village that she lived in basically chased her out and didn't want anything to do with her anymore. So she started going around trying to, as we discussed earlier, trying to use her psychic powers just to try and help people and find a way in life. And when she couldn't do that, unfortunately had to prostitute herself just to feel warm and to get some food. I mean, she had a horrible life. And her past is probably one of the most tragic pasts of a character in an RPG that I've ever heard. What she's had to be through just to survive. But then as things go on through the game, you see glimmers of hope. And then by the end of the game, she actually seems content with who she is. She seems to have accepted herself a lot more than she did before. And even ends the game on a promising note for the future, say, after, at least in the canonical ending, after Edward rides off, and she's asked whether or not she wants to go with him, and she says that she's sure she'll meet him again in the future. Spoilers for Shadow Hearts 1 now. is that so yeah, you might want to stop if you want to, or yeah, just pre-warning that there are some spoilers for Shadow Hearts 1. I mean, I've already warned, but I'll just say it again. She appears in Shadow Hearts 1 as a secondary background character. However, her son doesn't. Her son is a playable character in your party who happens to be the son of Edward. So she ends up getting her own family, and while they're broken to begin with in Shadow Hearts, they do end up coming together, and she gets that love that she's always wanted. She gets it from her son. They end up going, then at the end of the game, going off to sail to America in the hopes of finding Edward again, so that she can finally have that family that she's always wanted. And that, where she's come from to where she ends up in the Koudelka Shadow Hearts series, it's just so, I don't know, it just portrays over the fact that you can overcome your past so well. I mean, she had one of the worst possible lives she could, and she still managed to basically come to terms with herself, be loved, and have a family. I mean, she got everything she wanted. It took time and it took a lot of sacrifice, but she got there. And that's kind of a real big part of Koudelka the game and Koudelka the character. So then the final thing that kind of I wanted to go over before we start summarising the endings is the class and social status. Again, this mostly comes from James. James has a major impact on the themes of the game and how the plot's ideals are kind of portrayed, because you're playing the game effectively through the eyes of Koudelka. So everything that James does, you see from her point of view. You're not seeing it from his point of view. So the blind faith, you're looking from the outside. You're not looking at someone who is blinded by faith. You're looking at someone watching that person. And it's the same with this as well. So for example, when you first meet James, you actually save him from a giant plant monster. But rather than be grateful, he's very distrusting of you, both Koudelka and Edward, simply because of the way they're dressed. They are obviously low class scum, and he doesn't trust them. He's wondering why they're there. He goes with them out of fear for his life from the monsters, but he doesn't want to be near them because he views them as a lower social status than himself. Going back, funny enough, coming full circle back to James's blind faith, rather than accepting that that the caretakers, who seem to be of a kind of mid to high level social status, could possibly be murderers, when they come across a thief, I think his name is Elias, when they come across him, James instantly tries to say that he was the murderer because he is a thief and therefore he is a low quality citizen, lower status, lower class, so he absolutely must be the murderer because it couldn't possibly be someone of a higher class. But interestingly, James himself has actually experienced this negativity as well, because when he and Patrick were younger, as I stated, they were friends and they were both in love with Elaine. However, James actually stepped back and let Patrick court Elaine instead of trying to compete, simply because he knew he didn't have the social status at the time to actually provide a good life for her, and that led him to the church. So again, it all kind of comes back and comes around in a circle. Everything connects together. All of these themes that seem completely separate from each other all connect together so brilliantly that it creates one whole overarching theme as well. And that overarching theme is basically how the struggle of life can lead to two possibilities. You either fail or you succeed. That's it. Everyone has struggles, everyone goes through hard times, some people go through horrific times, but the overarching story of the game is no matter what you go through, there are only two possible outcomes. Only. You either succumb to it, give in, and that's the end. You fail, you don't get anywhere. Or you take it in your stride, you build yourself up, you work through it, you survive, you battle your way through it, and you get a hopeful future. And that's kind of what the whole game is about, in my opinion. Obviously, everyone's going to view it differently, but to me, everything that happens in the game is so horrific. Everything that the people go through is so terrible. But then the people who come out the other side, they go on to have hope for the future. They get a chance of having something really good in their life. And that, for me, is what the game is all about. No matter how dark and depressing it is, no matter how horrible everything is in the storyline, it's that hope at the end. That's where things get to. Okay, so if we can talk about the endings next, there are three different endings. The way they happen all kind of revolve around, funny enough, two things again. Whether or not you picked up the pendant that Koudelka loses in the intro of the game. If you don't, and you go to try and fight the final boss, Elaine, then as soon as she wakes up, she will blast you with some magic, your skin will melt, and everyone in the party dies, and it's a game over, and that's the end of the game. Coming back to the overarching story, one of the things that happens is you've lost this incredibly important necklace to you. Rather than fight through it and get that necklace back, you just say, okay, I've lost it, fine. Ugh. You just get on with it. Don't really care. You've lost all interest because you failed at something. Basically, Koudelka's failed because she couldn't get that necklace. You can't find it. You've been looking for it, you can't find it, and you give up. Basically, one way or another, you give up. You go to the final boss, and the game ends with everyone dying and failing. Which goes back, as I said, to the overall story of you either give up and fail, push through and succeed. So then that gets a little bit more confusing when you actually look at the two endings when you do have that necklace, because there's the canonical ending and then there's the obviously non-canonical ending. We'll start with the non-canon ending. The non-canon ending basically happens when you beat the boss, when you actually win the final boss battle. At that point, the boss dies, everyone lives happily ever after, everyone goes to separate ways, the end. It's neat, tidy, and everything's wrapped up. There's no way for a sequel, everyone's just gone. Everyone's happy, they've just left each other, that's the end of it. But the canon ending, interestingly enough, in my opinion, goes back to this whole really bad things happen, but if you struggle through it, you can survive and you can have a good life. In a way. So basically, to get the canon ending, the one that leads into Shadow Hearts, the one that continues the story as it actually is supposed to be, you actually have to lose the final fight. You have to lose the final boss fight. I mean, that in itself is really strange. To get the proper ending, you have to lose in the boss fight. But you don't die, you just lose. A cutscene will then play where James, coming full circle in his storyline, accepts who he is, accepts everything that's happened to him, everything he's seen, accepts his faults, his blind faith, accepts everything, and decides that his love is going to be his driving force. And he grabs his cross, he walks forward to Elaine, barely able to stand himself. He walks forward to Elaine, who is at this point a giant insect monster, brandishes the cross and basically spurts out his love for her and his love for life and for God, because he is still a bishop, and he manages to summon this beam of light that comes down and cleanses both him and Elaine. Elaine's spirit goes back into her body. She stops being a monster, returns to human form, explains how she never kind of forgot him, never really gave up on the memories that she had with him from when they were younger, and the two get to pass on together. So he does die, but he goes to Elaine. He gets to be with Elaine. He gets what he always wanted. So while it is final for him, going through all of that struggle that he's gone through, obviously through his life and through losing his best friend and the love of his life in the monastery, and then going through everything in the monastery, eventually it gets to the point where he accepts that has happened, and if he just lets it win over him, nothing's ever going to work out, nothing's going to be good for anyone. So he accepts it into himself. He accepts that these struggles have happened, I will work past them, and he does, and he gets his happy ending. In an essence, he gets to be with the woman that he loves, even if it's only for a brief second before they both pass on. In the game's world, for all we know, they could still be together in the afterlife. We don't know, but we do know they pass on together, and he gets to be with the woman he loves and see her again after 20-something years, I think. So he gets that. He gets what he wanted because he doesn't give up. So then, after they've passed on, Koudelka and Edward have to basically jump off the top of the monastery. They do survive, and they spend the night together in a tent. That's what leads to the birth of Hallie, I think he's called, Koudelka and Edward's son in Shadow Hearts. And then they go on their way, but they both become better people from it, and it sets them on the path to get what they always wanted, which was a loving family. They both needed a loving family, and through all of the hardships that they've been through, that's exactly what they're going to get now. So again, they didn't give up. Even after losing the battle, they were still there. They kept fighting to live. They could have just said, okay, this place is falling apart, it's going to just kill us if we don't get out of here, but we're too weak to move, we'll just die. Instead, they fought, they wanted to survive, they took everything that they'd been going through, and they went for it, and they took a leap of faith. They legitimately leaving off the building, and they continue on with their lives, and eventually they get to where they want to be. And I think that's the overall story of the game, is that if you just give up on things, even little things like if there's an important necklace to you and you lose it and you just give up, you decide you can't be bothered to look for it, it's too hard, that can come back and bite you. But if you keep going, if you don't give up and you just push through everything, eventually you'll get what you need and you'll get what you want and you will succeed in life. To me, that's what the game means, and I think that's amazing, considering how dark, depressing, violent and gory the game is. To have that kind of message come out of it, I think, is amazing. I hope you enjoyed this. Next week we will be reviewing something, I'm not sure yet, well, not reviewing, but analysing a game that I will put a poll out on Twitter. Now, the way I'm going to do this is weekly writing will be chosen by my Twitter followers, and then weekly retro, where we look at gameplay, will be chosen by my Patreon supporters. So whether you're a supporter or not, you will still get to have some say in how the channel grows. I think that'll be quite fun for everyone. So yeah, look out for that poll on Twitter. Thanks for watching, listening, whatever. Have a great day. See you later.